Hello everybody, it's Mr. G, the history teacher, coming at you with another Misconceptions in History. And today I'm starting my new series on armored warfare. And I wanted to start that with the first war to ever actually have tank warfare, and that is World War I. So we're going to be looking at World War I and tanks. Now for me, the very first image I conjure when I think of a tank is this right here, the M4 Sherman, my personal favorite tank. But in reality, there's much more to tanks than this. So when we talk about the purpose of tanks, we've got to actually go very historical, and we've got to look at siege engines. And a siege engine is a device designed to take down enemy fortifications, walls, things like that. And this right here is an ancient battering ram, and they changed over time, but the purpose is all the same. You know, we go into things like the trebuchet, which would be a very big step up to taking down enemy fortifications at a distance. With trebuchets and catapults, you could now essentially destroy an enemy's fortifications with relative safety. But what really changed the game was gunpowder weapons. Cannons and guns completely changed warfare. It meant that the traditional way of siege warfare, building walls and defense fortifications, didn't matter anymore. The power of artillery proved that the old way of building defenses was gone, and that there was a need for a massive change. Now, before we saw the first tank on the battlefield of World War I, we saw the first tracked tractors being used in warfare. And basically the whole purpose of this was for artillery. They needed a means to get this heavy artillery through the just absolutely horrid and nasty conditions of the trenches. And because of the weight disbursement abilities of having a tracked vehicle, this made it ideal for taking across these conditions. And so they used these tractors to move artillery across the trenches of World War I. Now, were these tractors tanks? No. But they showed the value that having this type of tracked system could have in mobility in this type of warfare. Now, by the start of World War I, and we get into the 1915s, we start to see multiple nations actually try to utilize this technology and create vehicles that could easily travel across the trenches. Now, some of these early designs of what would later be called land ships were absolutely crazy. Scenes such as here as the French Borat machine, which was basically a big track around a rolling frame, and it was supposed to rotate. You also have the Frott-Lafley land ship, which honestly just looks like a big hunk of metal on some wheels. But the French were not alone in their unusual designs. The British followed them with their own series of unusually developed and designed trench crossers. And we can't leave the Russians out of this development of trench crossing land ships with their Tsar tank that had 30-foot wide in diameter wheels. And that's just an absolutely massive vehicle. Now, by the time we reach 1916, we get to the British Mark I, which completely changes the game for everyone. And we start to see the tanks that were more associated with by the French, the Germans, the Russians, all begin to make tanks that more feel and seem familiar to us. And different nations choose different things. With the French, we see a lot more smaller, faster tanks. The Germans, we see a lot more medium-sized tanks. And with the British and Americans, we see a lot more larger, heavier tanks that have better armor. By the time we get to 1917, we get to the Battle of Cambrai in France. And we see the first large-scale usage of tanks successfully. This battle showed the effectiveness of tanks when properly utilized in warfare, and also the beginning of anti-tank warfare tactics. Now, by the time the United States had joined, they had ventured into multiple developments in tank warfare. This included the American-British developed Mark 8 tank, also sometimes called the Liberty. And this was going to be a very successful heavy tank design. They just didn't finish it by the end of the war. What we have instead is we see things like the American copies of French tanks, like the M1917 light tank, which was just a copy of the French Renault FT tank. Or we see American manufacturers get involved in tank development, like with the Ford 3-ton M1918 tank. But as the United States entered World War I rather late, there was no mass-produced American-made tanks. So there you have just a brief snippet of tank development in World War I. Like I said, this is just going to be the beginning of the series. I'd like to do some more about the British Mark tank series, and eventually I'll do the M4 Sherman. And if you have any other tanks you'd like to hear, please let me know. And that's all for today. This is Mr. G signing out, and I look forward to talking to you on the next time.